Hey there, it's Tamara from fitknitchick.com. Welcome back to FitKnitchick's Knitting Bootcamp, lesson number 2. Today we're going to talk about the pattern that we're going to embark on, and I'm going to give you a supplies list along with a few tips for purchasing those supplies. Alright, so the pattern that I've chosen for us is a cowl. This is what a cowl looks like. It's basically a long tube. The beautiful thing about a cowl is you can knit it as long as you want. We will start with a specified number of stitches that would give us a cowl, maybe about this diameter. If you want to knit something a little bit shorter than this, so not so big around, I'll give you another option for making something that you don't have to loop twice. The project will be faster and you won't need as many materials, as much yarn, okay? So the beautiful thing about this pattern, which I'm going to link up, it's a pattern that I found on Ravelry. It's called a gray loop. It's a really simple pattern. You'll need to learn just a few things. We'll need to learn to cast on stitches onto our needles. That'll be our first tutorial. We'll need to learn the knit stitch. That'll be our next tutorial after that. We need to learn the purl stitch. For those of you who don't want to get any fancier than knitting and purling, you can do the whole project with just those 2 stitches. If you want to add a little bit more intrigue to your cowl, that is little lacy holes, I'm going to teach you 2 more stitches, a yarn over and a knit 2 together. It sounds way more complicated than it is, and I'm going to be linking up some videos for you. There's tons of great resources online that show you much better than I would be able to how to do each of these things, and we'll have some chatter back and forth in the Facebook group if you're having any difficulties. I'll also make sure that you learn how to spot errors in your work and undo those errors before they turn into big holes, or if you've ever tried to knit a square when you were a little girl and it turned into a triangle, that's probably because you added stitches when you shouldn't have. So I'll give you lots of tips and tricks for avoiding those mistakes as well, but I'm going to also tell you the beautiful thing about this pattern is when you wear it bunched up around your neck like this, nobody is going to be able to tell if you dropped a stitch or 2 or if you added a stitch or 2. So it's a fairly forgiving pattern for a new knitter, all right? So what you'll need to do is you'll need to go to the URL, the link that I give you with the pattern. You're going to want to download this pattern, and then you're going to need to make a list of things to take with you to the yarn shop, all right? So I'm a member of Ravelry, which is like an online community, Facebook for knitters and crocheters, and you get access to all sorts of great resources there. So I'm looking at the pattern on Ravelry right now. It's called a gray loop, and you need something called a DK, or a double knitting weight of yarn. So we talked before about choosing a nice yarn, a nice weight of yarn, something that feels good or is going to feel good around your neck, not going for the cheap, skimpy $5, 2 kilometers of yarn from the bulk bin, but choose something that looks nice and something that feels nice. One of my tricks is when I go to a yarn shop, I put the yarn under my chin. I feel what it feels like. My kids think I'm totally nuts, but I like to think that I know how that yarn's going to feel against my skin when I wear it. There's nothing worse than knitting something and then realizing afterwards you can't wear it because it's so itchy, it's driving you crazy. I've been there. So rub it against your cheek, rub it against your neck. Make sure that you like the feel and the color of the yarn, okay? You're going to ask the person who's behind the counter at the yarn shop to help you select a DK, or a double knitting weight yarn. So yarn comes in different weights, from very, very fine lace weight, which would take forever to knit up into a scarf like this, to very, very chunky yarn that would knit up very, very quickly, but would be super, super hot for most of you. We're going somewhere in the middle, a double knitting weight of yarn. My pattern tells me that I'm going to need 345 to 411 yards. Whenever I'm given a range like that, I go with the top end. Now, every single brand of yarn will have different yardage. So I'm looking at a ball of Sheeps's Donna, which I really like. I knit this with this a lot for baby clothes. It's got 112 meters. Oh great, now I have to change from meters to yards. Let's just assume it's yards. So it's got 112 in a ball. I need 345 to 411. So let's say I'm going to need 4 balls. That's going to get me 448. It's going to give me a little bit of padding. Oftentimes I will buy 1 extra just in case. Even though these patterns have been knit time and time again, there's nothing worse than running out of yarn before you finish a project, going back to the yarn shop and being told we don't have any left. Can you tell it's happened to me before? So I always buy an insurance ball. Keep your receipt. Most yarn shops will let you bring it back within 6 months. This project is not going to take you 6 months, I promise. Okay, so buy an insurance skein. Always better to have on hand just in case. So you're going to buy 345 to 411 yards of a DK weight yarn. Now, when you buy yarn that's been created by a big company, so not by a small independent yarn dyer, there's going to be something called a dye lot on the label. It's going to be a digit, maybe 4 or 6 digits. You want to make sure that you get all your balls of yarn with the same dye lot. You don't think it's going to matter, but I know that once you knit it up, you will see the difference when you switch from one dye lot to another. Sometimes it's really obvious. It almost looks like a completely different color. So dye lot needs to be the same, okay? So you've got your yarn. You know what to do for yarn. Of course, you're going to need needles. Now, probably most of you have seen people knitting on 2 needles, long needles, either made of wood or made of aluminum. Click, 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 click. For this project, we are not going to use long needles or straight needles. We're going to use a circular needle. Now, I like circular needles for a lot of reasons. You can use them in lieu of straight needles on straight needle projects. The nice thing about them is the tips are fairly short. So if you've got a big project with a lot of project or yarn, knitted yarn hanging from it, most of the weight of that project is going to be carried by the cable that joins the 2 ends and is going to be sitting in your lap as opposed to sitting on the weight of your shoulders, okay? So if you have issues with shoulders and wrists, these kinds of circular needles are a great way to go as well. You will need to buy a 5mm circular needle. That is the diameter of the needle, the diameter. They come in tons and tons of different diameters, all the way down from say 1.5 meters up to about 15 millimeters. Did I say meters? From 1.5 millimeters up to about 15 millimeters. And the size of the needle is really important because it works together with the weight of the yarn or how thick or thin the yarn is. So if you have a really, really huge needle and a really, really fine yarn, you're going to get a holey fabric. If you have a small needle and a really thick yarn, you're going to get something so dense that it doesn't move at all. So a pattern tells you what weight yarn and what the best size of needle to use for that yarn is. This pattern is suggesting an 80 centimeter circular, okay? So obviously the diameter of the cowl is going to be much, much bigger than that as we knit around. That's okay. Better that than the other way around. If you were knitting something very, very small and you were doing it on giant needles, you would be having to stretch your work to make a circle as you knit around. Don't worry if that's not clear right now. 5mm needle, 80 centimeters in length. If you're going to knit a smaller version of the cowl, you could use a 40 centimeter needle, length needle, okay? So again, I'll leave all the project notes for you here. One more thing you're going to need, I should just tell you before I go on, lots of different brand names of these kinds of needles. I kind of like the premium ones. I knit with Addi Turbos. They make you knit faster. You don't need to spend $20 on a needle like this. You could go with a less expensive needle like an arrow needle that you might pay $7 or $8 for. It will have a plastic tip. Some companies also make wooden or bamboo tips on their needles. Those are great for beginners. These kinds of needles, the stainless steel ones, are slippery. And they're slippery on purpose because they want to help people like me knit faster. But if you're brand new at knitting and you don't want your needles to go your stitches to go sliding off the needles, you might prefer plastic or bamboo, okay? So ask the person at the yarn shop to help you select a pair of needles, a set of needles that's going to work for this project. Last thing you're going to need is something called a stitch marker. Now, I've got tons and tons of stitch markers. I don't know, can you see? Oh, they're going to fall all over. All these little circles. You need something that looks like a washer, teeny tiny washer. If you don't want to buy a stitch marker, I have used paper clips. I have used little tiny ponytail holders. I have used twist ties as long as they don't have a sharp edge to snag the yarn. I've even taken another contrasting color of yarn and made a tiny little loop. What you're going to do with this as we knit is it's going to be sitting on your needle, and as you're knitting around in a circle, when you get to it, you're just going to slide it off from one needle to the next. What it's doing is it's telling you where the end of your row or your round is. So we know where you started and we know when you finished, all right? So 3 things you need to buy. You need to buy yarn. Think about what you're going to wear this with, or who you're going to give it to and what their favorite colors are. Think about whether you like wool, whether you'd prefer an alternative fiber like hemp or cotton, or a silk blend. I wouldn't go complete silk, it's more expensive and it's slippery. It will slide off your needles and may frustrate you a little bit more. Ask your yarn store person, she'll be able to help you. You need your needles and you need something to mark the beginning of your round. All right, there's your homework for today. Download the pattern, make a project list, yarn, needles, and marker, and go shopping. All right, I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Please share with pictures or notes the yarn that you've decided to buy, okay? Until next time.